Having choices is good, and checking accounts are no exception. At Sandy Spring Bank, we have a variety of checking options and make it easy to choose based on your needs. Mobile deposits and payments, interest checking, or checking with no fees or minimums. Best of all, we'll help you select the account that suits your life. What's your next financial destination? Sandy Spring Bank. Visit sandyspringbank.com/checking. Member FDIC.
Welcome to Dear Prudence. I'm your Prudence, Jenée Desmond-Harris. Today, we'll be weighing in on readers' questions about what to do when your fatphobic in-laws are overstaying their welcome, and whether to interfere when your best friend is pressuring her husband into an open marriage. Here to help me out is the audio producer and storyteller Ronald Young Jr. Among many other things, he hosts podcasts including Leaving the Theater and Wait for It, which unpacks the thoughts of people who think about their weight all the time. He's a 3-time Podcast Academy Award winner. Welcome, Ronald.
Hello, Jenée. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you. And I want to start off by giving you a chance to offer one piece of unsolicited advice.
Oof. I just lost my mom not long ago.
I'm so sorry.
I appreciate that. I appreciate the condolences. It's weird because people always say, I'm sorry. And I'm like, I know it's the knee-jerk response.
Yeah.
And it's like, I always want to tell people, like, I get it. But it's like, it just like, now it's a pain that I just kind of live with.
Yeah.
So if I had to give people unsolicited advice, it would be to video record and audio record your loved ones. Do it all the time. Do it as much as you possibly can, because the one way that I feel like my mom is still alive is through video and audio recordings that we took of her when she was here. There's one in particular where she's in a recording studio and she's just cutting up, having a good time. And when I'm able to look at those videos or listen to her voice, there's a voicemail of her singing me happy birthday. When I'm able to access stuff like that, it kind of just makes me feel like she's just away on a trip. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like she's just outside of reach, and it doesn't feel like she's not coming back. It feels like she'll be right back. So I would say audio and video record your loved ones as much as you can. Be irritating about it. Be the person that just has that stuff cataloged and ready to go, because you never know how much time you have.
That's priceless advice. And did you do it like as an interview where you were being intentional about sort of capturing her life story, or was it just day-to-day videos of whatever happened to be going on?
So that's probably my biggest regret, was when she got sick, my intention was to really start getting some of her story on the record. And I had one of those thoughts where I'm like, well, I want to wait till she recovers a little bit so she feels a little better before I'm like bombarding her with questions and all that. But I didn't realize how little time we had. And so there is stuff with her on the record. Like I've done podcasts and stuff with her talking about herself and her life and parenting and all that, which is good. And there is some stuff about her growing up as well and interactions with her and my dad, which is good. But there's no like formal her sitting down and saying like, hey, this is my life. But there's enough of it in my memory that I could recite it to anyone who wanted to know.
Yeah. And we all have cell phones with video capability.
Exactly.
So there's no excuse. You don't need a studio. It doesn't have to be a big production.
As a matter of fact, you don't even want it that like polished. You know what I mean? You really just want like the most spontaneous bits that you could get from people. It's important.
And then back up your phone.
Yeah. And yes. Back up your phone. Put it in the cloud. Put it on a hard drive. Like encase it in concrete and bury it.
That's the part I would miss. Thank you so much for that. Ronald and I will dive into your questions after a short break. Want more Dear Prudence? Subscribe to Slate Plus to immediately unlock weekly bonus episodes. Plus, you'll access ad-free listening across all your favorite Slate podcasts. Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of our show page, or visit slate.com/Prudie Plus to get access wherever you listen.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Hey, listeners, whether you love true crime or comedies, celebrity interviews, news, or even motivational speakers, you call the shots on what's in your podcast queue, right? And guess what? Now you can call the shots on your auto insurance, too. Enter the Name Your Price tool from Progressive. The Name Your Price tool puts you in charge of your auto insurance by working just the way it sounds. You tell Progressive how much you want to pay for car insurance, then they'll show you a variety of coverages that fit within your budget, giving you options. Now that's something you'll want to press play on. It's easy to start a quote and you'll be able to choose the best option for you fast. It's just one of the many ways that you can save with Progressive Insurance. Quote today at progressive.com to try the Name Your Price tool for yourself and join over 28 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
The best way to learn a language? Immersion. Living where the language is spoken and using it every day. But if that's not in the cards this year, you can still learn a language the second best way. And that's with Babbel. I love how easy it is to use, and as a person who can be really self-conscious about making mistakes, I love that I don't have to actually talk to a real human while I'm still working on my vocabulary and my accent. Be a better you in 2024 with Babbel, the science-based language-driven learning app that actually works. Don't pay hundreds of dollars for private tutors or waste hours on apps that don't really help you speak the language. Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons are handcrafted by over 200 language experts to help you start speaking a new language in as little as 3 weeks. Babbel's designed by real people for real conversations. Babbel's tips and tools are approachable, accessible, and rooted in real-life situations. They're delivered with conversation-based teaching, so you're ready to practice what you've learned in the real world. Babbel has over 16 million subscriptions sold. Plus, all of Babbel's 14 award-winning language courses are backed by their 20-day money-back guarantee. Here's a special limited-time deal for our listeners. Right now, get 55% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/Prudie. Get 55% off at babbel.com/Prudie, spelled BABBEL.com/Prudie. Rules and restrictions may apply. Welcome back. You're listening to Dear Prudence, and I'm here with Ronald. Let's get started with our first letter. It's titled, Too Big for BS.
So, my in-laws are not from the USA, and there are many joys and struggles of having international family. One of the struggles is their, quote, fat phobia and casual body shaming. The comments when they were visiting would often discuss how, quote, fat and, quote, big Americans are due to hormones in food and being, quote, lazy about eating out and the, quote, grotesquely large portions. While I agree there are many things wrong with our country in terms of health, consumerism, etc., I rarely blame individuals here for what I see as broader systemic issues with the USA. While I've attempted to ignore these comments, they escalated and have become more directed towards me during their extended visits. Recently, after a bout of illness where I lost 8 pounds while they were staying with us, I mentioned as an aside to my spouse while we were at the doctor that my jeans were fitting loosely. Rather than acknowledging that I am sick while also juggling the responsibilities of hosting them or asking if I was okay, my mother-in-law made a snide comment about my weight, insinuating that I'm not that skinny. I feel outraged by this, as my mother-in-law frequently gloats about how she's, quote, such a feminist. Also, when we visited them abroad, my mother-in-law does this ritual of giving old clothes to my other 2 sisters-in-law. She never offers me the clothing or makes me part of the ritual, and it's deeply hurtful. I think she stereotypes me as a fat American. These comments and actions have left me feeling resentful, especially considering that I have a BMI of 18.7, which, I know, is not an accurate or useful measure of health or beauty. However, I am objectively at the lowest possible healthy weight I can be by medical standards. What's more, my in-laws' comments extend beyond my body. They often criticize our home when they stay, even going so far as to comment on the privacy in the bathroom and that they can hear when I'm working remotely. For context, when they visit, they stay with us for weeks, sometimes as long as 4 weeks, in our tiny 1-bedroom apartment, often refusing to go out and see the city. My husband struggles to address these issues as he wants our time together with his family to be conflict-free, since he rarely gets to see them. He begs me not to say anything and to just ignore it and remember how they're good to me. For a long time, I was devastated that my in-laws viewed me this way. Coming from a very dysfunctional family, I always hoped that I would have a close, loving relationship with my future in-laws one day. Now, I am at wit's end, and any advice would be greatly appreciated.
So I chose this question because the in-laws fat phobia obviously touches on some of the themes you covered in Wait For It. But before we get to that, I've just got to get one thing out of the way. 2 people staying for 4 weeks in a small 1-bedroom apartment?
Absolutely not.
Hell on earth. When I lived in a 1-bedroom, I think I maybe had someone spend the night once, and it was an exceptional circumstance. That's horrible.
Yeah. When they said that, I'm like, first of all, 4 weeks at a time, that's unhinged behavior. There's no reason for anyone to be anywhere that long. In-laws visiting, max 2 weeks. 4 weeks, that's wow. What are we talking about here?
I mean, I know it's tough. I get that it might be the kind of thing that's sort of culturally defined, especially if you have in-laws who live abroad and you want to see them. I know that people do tend to have parents from other countries come and stay for a while.
Yeah.
But not in a 1-bedroom. If you have someone staying with you in a 1-bedroom for a month and there's 4 humans in there, you're going to hate each other at the end, even if everyone's perfect. No one's fatphobic. Everyone's kind. It's just a breeding ground for conflict and resentment. It doesn't seem healthy to me. Yeah,
you're right. It's a combination. It's not just a time. It's a time and space issue. It's both the combination of 4 weeks with y'all being in, a max 1,000 square feet? Like, if you're lucky, you know what I mean? Like, there's no reason. And what are you doing, with your spouse for those 4 weeks? Where's everybody sleeping? You can hear everything. There's no privacy, and don't have kids.
Oh my God. Please don't add kids to the situation. Anyway, so letter writer, you kind of just gloss over that. Like, that's not the problem. And that might actually be what's really wrong here.
Agreed.
We'll get into it. And your mother-in-law sounds like she has a lot of issues and she's not the best person. But it wouldn't be affecting you this way if you weren't living, sleeping, and breathing on top of her 100%. For an unreasonable amount of time.
Yes. It also feels unreasonable for the son, her husband, to not acknowledge that could be the issue. Because if you're going to tell me to be in my own 1-bedroom apartment and to ignore these people who are being actively rude to me for a month of my life in my space, that is completely unreasonable for you to ask. And if that's the case, you need to be putting them up in a hotel for a month. If you want me to ignore them, because that's the trade-off, is that I get to go home and be in my house. But you're saying in my house, I got to act different? Like, no, absolutely not. The house needs to be bigger.
I can see him making that request. Maybe. It still wouldn't be great. I still think people should stand up for their spouses to their in-laws. But if these comments were coming in over WhatsApp, he could say, okay, could you just mute the thread or not look at it as much? Could you deal with it? But this is her space. This is where she lives. This is where she has to try to be happy. Kind of like a form of torture. 100%. To be insulted in your own home for a long period of time.
In my house? Like, I'm sorry, I'm thinking about my own house. Like, I'm at home in my house, and you're going to come in my house and tell me I can't do this in my house? Like, that's completely unreasonable, husband. Stop that.
Right. Okay, so that was my second point, the husband. Him begging her to ignore the comments. Red flag as far as their marriage? Unacceptable?
Yes. Yes. You just said it. I'm so tired of a genre of relationships being husbands not standing up or spouses not standing up for their spouse when it comes to their in-laws. Because if it was my parents and they were treating my partner a certain way, I would say, hey, the only leverage I have here is my own relationship with you. So if you expect to have a relationship with me, you need to treat her well. Better than you treat me, even. Like, there's no reason for you to be making her feel uncomfortable doing actively mean things. If they're doing things that have nothing to do with, being overtly mean, saying like, oh, I don't like that your parents, eat kimchi, you know what I mean? Or do something like that I find offensive, that's totally different from them doing and saying rude things directly to her and me not doing anything about it, just saying ignore it. Like, that's not okay.
Okay, I saw this the same way, and I thought maybe one suggestion could be for the letter writer and her husband to kind of divide up these comments and issues into 2 categories. One is mother-in-law having backward, weird ideas about food and bodies and Americans, and the other one is direct attacks on the letter writer.
Yes.
So I think you kind of got to let her have her worldview and be ignorant and whatever, and maybe let the comments about, oh my God, I can't believe the portion sizes are so big here. It's so offensive. Maybe let those slide off and really target the comments about the letter writer's body, the problems with the house. What we need to put a stop to is not the bad worldview, but the insults, right?
Yes.
So I think if we could isolate those and make those the topic that the husband brings up with his mom and tells her that she has to stop, that might be effective. And maybe the letter writer could learn to kind of let the other comments roll off a little bit and just kind of roll her eyes and keep on moving. Because you're not going to turn this woman into someone who has a different personality and a different outlook on life, right?
You are 100% correct. And I think the idea that we're going to change someone's mind is I've watched people be frustrated over that over and over again, where I'm just like, you're not going to change their mind. You can change their behavior, though, because at the very bare minimum, they can know that Ronald doesn't like that. Don't do that. Because at the bare minimum, it's like what you're just saying is if you do that thing that I don't like, and I told you that I don't like it, you are now responsible for the consequences that happen next, whatever they may be. Like you might not have a mattress when you go back to your room. I'll just be like, that's the cost of these insults. You can do them, but every time you do that, I'm removing a new piece of furniture from the guest room or my living room or wherever you're staying.
Not
in
the
my
guest room. There's no guest room.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm removing the couch from my living room.
I also hate that the consequences for this kind of stuff, or the alternative is put them in a hotel or get an Airbnb, which costs so much money.
Yes.
Which isn't fair because it's easier for someone who can afford a hotel or Airbnb for their parents.
Yeah. Or even that can afford a bigger house. Like it's easier for them. And that feels unfair.
Absolutely.
Yes.
That could be a whole podcast episode. Like money makes relationships easier.
Correct.
Money can create the situation for relationships to be easier and people's mental health to be better.
Yes.
It can just really, really simplify things and sort of smooth out the rough corners of relationships. And it's not fair.
That's also a slippery slope because the minute we start talking about that, then we start saying, well, who has the money and why do they have so much of it? And then if we all had more, maybe we would all be less stressed. So then in whose interest for us to be stressed? And then all of a sudden we're to capitalism, the podcast.
Exactly. So you're so funny. Letterman, your husband's got to do something. I think in an ideal world, his parents would want to be better people around you. Because don't parents want their kids to be in happy relationships?
Yes.
Don't you want your son to not end up divorced?
Correct.
Don't you want him to not be at odds with his wife? Don't you want them to stay together and maybe if they plan to have children, give you grandchildren?
Yes.
Like, this is a group effort, right?
Yes. It's a group project.
Yeah. I don't think it's too big of an ask to say, don't talk about my wife's body. And if you have anything bad to say about our house, that means you're not going to be staying here anymore. Those are the rules.
That's low-hanging fruit.
I really, really don't think that's too much to ask. Okay, going a little deeper in this, I want to talk about a little bit about what you've discussed on Wait For It and how it ties into this. So in this clip of episode 2 of Wait For It, which we're about to play, you talk candidly about a relationship you had in college and the attitudes you used to hold about weight.
Caitlin was fat, and I didn't want anyone to know that I was attracted to her. To be attracted to someone fat was an indicator that something was wrong with you. You weren't normal. When I met Caitlin, I was immediately attracted to her, even before we started talking. Her weight was a non-issue for me, but talking to and hanging out with my friends had an impact on me. I really wanted to fit in, to be a normal guy hanging with the fellas. So despite really liking Caitlin and loving how she made me feel, she fell short of the standards I set for myself, now reinforced with the opinions of my new friendships.
So in the episode, you actually speak to the woman about how your remarks about her body impacted her self-image and ultimately your own. I thought that was really brave and transparent to admit. And I wonder if it gives you some understanding of the mother-in-law here, some kind of empathy or some kind of framework for seeing their views as part of a larger problem and less as a personality flaw.
I think it's a personality flaw. I do think that the personality flaw is still part of a larger problem. I think I'm holding both of these things to be true.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, the rest of that episode, I'm really going after myself in large portions of it. And I don't think like that anymore. And it was the split in my thinking from societal views that allowed me to really be able to have compassion both on myself and on other fat people. You know what I mean? So I think there has to be that same splitting from societal views and norms in everyone when it comes to most marginalized groups. You really have to have that split from what society says is okay or what society expects people to be. You really have to have that mental split in order for you to actually move forward and be compassionate to people. And I just think trying to do the work to make people have that split ourselves is exhausting. And her relationship with her mother-in-law is too close for her to be the one to make that change. And if anyone should be going through that stress, it should be the son, because he loves the person that is the victim of this abuse from the mother-in-law. So he should be the one doing that labor. Here's some podcasts for you to listen to. Here's some books for you to read. Here's a newspaper article. Also, she's your daughter-in-law. You're making her feel bad. You know what I mean? It should be that simple. So I hold both. I hold it is a personality flaw, but that personality flaw is caused by societal views and what society deems to be normal.
And it's a statement about your personality that with all the information we have access to, you haven't decided to challenge your own views at this point in 2024, right?
Yes.
Even if you live in another country, we all have the same internet.
Correct. If I go to another country and I know that they are culturally different from me, it is not up to me to try to change the culture of an entire country or to spend the entire 4 weeks that I'm there criticizing their culture. When I go back to America, maybe. You know what I mean? But if I'm in another country, why would I spend my whole time there being like, y'all do this wrong? That's like an episode of 90 Day Fiancé. Literally, they go overseas and they just start blasting how terrible Africa is. And I'm like, well, you didn't have to come here, Angela.
It's so true. And also complaining to the people who are hosting you about it.
Correct.
I mean, nobody begged you to come, I'm guessing. You wanted to.
And we'd like you to leave. We wanted you to leave 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. Good perspective on that. And one more sort of thing that jumped out at me. It's a really small thing, but I think it might speak to a larger issue. I noticed the letter writer saying that she does not consider herself overweight at all. But I also noticed she knows her exact BMI down to the decimal point. That's weird to me. I wonder if the letter writer has a preoccupation or a struggle with her own weight, which of course can affect people even who are in smaller bodies, that's being triggered by the mother-in-law and maybe should really be addressed separately. Definitely the mother-in-law situation needs attention. But if you're finding yourself so upset by someone who says Americans are fat and who seems to think your sisters-in-law are thinner than you, even though you're telling yourself your body is a perfectly fine size, but it's still so upsetting, I wonder if you have some deeper body image issues that the situation could be a little red flag about maybe working on. Because if you're really, really, really okay with your body, you're not going to care about someone sitting around talking about portion sizes and, how you're not skinny. You're not going to care.
That's the thing, though. Like, I would posit, and this might be breaking news for some, unless you've listened to wait for it, I think everyone has body image problems. And I think everyone is saddled with these body image issues, again, by societal norms. And I think there's ways in which we say we are, air quote, okay with how we look until someone notes that how we look does not fall into an even more specific standard. Like everyone who, if you're thinking that everyone who's size 18 is like, man, it'd be nice to be size 14. And everyone who's size 14 is like, man, it'd be nice to be size 12. And everyone who's size 4 is like, man, it'd be nice if I can get back down to a size 0. You know what I mean? Like there's people that all think that they should be further along the scale, or for lack of a better term, and no pun intended, but further along the scale based on what society is deeming they should look like. And I think I would say that this woman probably has the same thing that all of us have, which is a mirror. And we look in that mirror and we make judgment based on what's in the media. And I imagine it's only being exacerbated by this mother-in-law's comments, who's continuing to say things that are unfavorable, unflattering, and unkind.
Okay, that's fair. No need to go to eating disorder treatment. She's just dysfunctional in the way that we're all dysfunctional as a reflection of the culture we live in.
Yeah, well, I would say it's possible she would need to go to, and I don't want to rule that out. I'm just saying, like, when I read that, the only reason why it didn't ping for me is because I'm like, well, I know there's a lot of people out there that are just like, just a few more pounds. You know what I mean?
That's so true. And we're inundated by content about Ozempic and intermittent fasting and working out. And
intermittent fasting. BBLs. Oh my God, Jenée.
I don't feel like that's coming up in this context, but you know what I mean.
The greatest hits. Yes, I know what you mean.
It's really hard to go through life without thinking a lot about your body.
That's fair. Exactly. Yes, you are 100%
even down to the decimal point. Last thing I just want to mention, letter writer, as encouragement for you and your husband to address this issue, is that it's interesting to me that he says he wants the time with his family to be conflict free. but it isn't conflict-free. There is conflict right now. It's just inside your wife.
Yeah, and you're okay with that. Why are you okay with internal conflict?
Right.
You know, because you're still going to have to deal with that later.
Exactly. So it's not conflict-free. You're feeling the conflict. He needs to understand that. You're being hurt. We're not at a place of peacefulness and a good equilibrium right now. So try to get that across to him, that by you keeping this all in and suffering, that's not a winning plan. That's not a good long-term plan for you or your relationship.
You could just hit him with the question, which conflict do you prefer? Because this is not conflict-free. You just don't want to have conflict with them.
Right.
But you don't mind having conflict with me. Now, if you say that, like, you might as well warm up the gloves, because now because the fight has begun. You know,
have a couples counselor on speed dial. Have
exactly. You want a mediator on site.
Okay. Hope that helps. You're listening to the Dear Prudence Show, and when we come back, we'll be reading more of your letters. Stay with us. The best way to learn a language? Immersion. Living where the language is spoken and using it every day. But if that's not in the cards this year, you can still learn a language the second best way. And that's with Babbel. I love how easy it is to use. And as a person who can be really self-conscious about making mistakes, I love that I don't have to actually talk to a real human while I'm still working on my vocabulary and my accent. Be a better you in 2024 with Babbel, the science-based language-driven learning app that actually works. Don't pay hundreds of dollars for private tutors or waste hours on apps that don't really help you speak the language. Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons are handcrafted by over 200 language experts to help you start speaking a new language in as little as 3 weeks. Babbel's designed by real people for real conversations. Babbel's tips and tools are approachable, accessible, and rooted in real-life situations. They're delivered with conversation-based teaching, so you're ready to practice what you've learned in the real world. Babbel has over 16 million subscriptions sold. Plus, all of Babbel's 14 award-winning language courses are backed by their 20-day money-back guarantee. Here's a special limited-time deal for our listeners. Right now, get 55% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/Prudie. Get 55% off at babbel.com/Prudie, spelled BABBEL.com/Prudie. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Hey, it's Mel Robbins, and I've got a new podcast. Here's why you're going to love listening to it. It's about life and the simple things you can do to create a better one. I'll be sharing my funny stories and proven tools that have helped millions of people change their lives. Every episode will move you emotionally, move you to think differently, or move you into action. Listen to the Mel Robbins Podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts.
I'm Jenée, and you're listening to Dear Prudence. Ronald and I are about to tackle our last question for the day. Are you ready?
I am ready.
Okay, this letter is titled, Not a Free Pass.
My best friend Adeline has been married for 8 years. Recently, she confided in me that she's deeply unhappy in her marriage, for several reasons, one of them being an unsatisfying sex life. She then told me her solution, which I was floored by. She essentially bullied her husband into allowing her to sleep with other men. I asked her to elaborate on why she thinks that's going to help, and she said that she doesn't think he'll ever have the capacity to fix the other basic home life areas that she's unhappy with. But if she can at least get satisfied sexually, she'll be able to overlook those other issues. She doesn't see divorce as an option because they have 2 children, and it would financially be very difficult. She said her husband agreed to this by stating he just doesn't want to know about it. However, I'm also pretty close with her husband. Not close enough that he would ever confide in me, but close enough to know that there's no way he's actually okay with this arrangement. And he's just going along with it because he's very much a pushover and wants to try to save their marriage. To be clear, I have nothing against non-monogamous relationships in which all parties involved are fully consenting and comfortable. This is not a moral judgment against the practice itself, but I absolutely cannot support this rationale that Adeline basically gets a free pass to cheat on her husband under the guise of saving their marriage. And I really don't want to discuss it with her. Her husband, while he has several flaws, is not at all a bad person and would never hurt Adeline like that. So it's a bit upsetting to see that she's just so willing to force this upon him. At the same time, though, I hate to see her unhappy in general. And I want to be supportive and help her understand that she's not a failure of a human because she can't just make herself be satisfied with the status quo that she has, her words. How do I walk this line?
Okay, Ronald, you mentioned 90 Day Fiancé in a previous question. So I want to include that on a list of recommendations that also has Married at First Sight,
Yes.
Love is Blind, and Couples Therapy.
Oof. Oh,
Letter Writer.
The hits.
These are wonderful shows to watch for people like you and me who love to think about others' relationships.
Yes.
You're allowed to watch them, text with your friends, say what everyone should do,
Yep.
tweet about it. It really scratches that itch without actually inserting yourself in the real life relationships of people you care about.
Yes.
To be clear, when it comes to interfering in other people's marriages or dating life, my red line is abuse.
Yes.
If someone's being abused, get them out of there,
Yes.
confront them, make them stop, depending on what side they're on. I think this is in the category of potentially shitty, probably manipulative, but not abusive. So 100%, you got to mind your own business.
I second that. And I hope, I mean, I don't want to make this short, but I know I have a lot more to say about the actual situation itself. But for the advice, if I could close the book of that, like, this is none of your business. If she asks you a question directly, what you think, you can tell her what you think, which is fine. You cannot volunteer what you think because she did not ask you. But if she does ask you and you have the type of relationship where y'all are able to check each other, you can at least say, like, hey, if you're not satisfied, then I don't know why you're even trying this, because this is only going to make bad worse. But you can't say that unless she asks. So I would close the book on that and say, there's no line for you to walk. Unless she asks you, you don't say anything at all. It's none of your business.
Exactly. 100%. Okay, now unpack the whole situation a little more.
Okay, Jenée, this is a tale as old as time. Are we serious here? Like, someone unsatisfied in the relationship, so they decide to become polyamorous, spontaneous polyamory, which I'm always like, in most of, and this is anecdotal, and so I don't want all the polyamorous listeners to come after me, but I will say this, every time I've seen spontaneous polyamory, which is a relationship go from monogamous to polyamorous.
As an alternative to breaking up or whatever.
Correct.
Yeah.
As an alternative, it has never been successful. What I have seen is people that were dating and polyamorous, got married and were still polyamorous and continued to be polyamorous. That worked. It came from a place of them being, air quotes, single to in a relationship to then continuing along the way. So the idea of them doing this, as soon as I saw the word saving their marriage, I'm like, this is not going to save your marriage. Like, if you have problems and you're not addressing them and you're trying to address them this way, well, you're not actually addressing the actual problems. You're only addressing the symptoms of the problems, which is not going to like actually cure what the issue is. So come on.
Not to say people can't evolve and change, but I think if you were both interested in polyamory and really felt that you could love multiple people at once, you would have known that before you became unsatisfied. That just would have been a value you had or an identity you had before the marriage went bad. You would have had it. You would have felt the same way when things were good. I agree with your anecdotal, informal. That based on my minding other people's business on the internet, I think you're right. That when openness happens as a coping mechanism or as a last resort, people don't generally end up too happy. Yeah,
I feel like the question of, well, why don't we open it up? If that becomes a solution to a problem, then I feel like you could possibly be creating a different problem. Why don't we open it up? Like you said, it's something that happened when y'all are both happy. Just, I'm really happy in this relationship and I'm also happy loving other people. And y'all already had that conversation. Matter of fact, that's not going to be a conversation you have when the chips are down. Like, if it's coming up, then you're basically saying this is like you're using it as an escape hatch. And I think polyamorous people would agree with this to say, like, this actually is giving polyamory a bad rap because it becomes this crowbar, this relationship crowbar, rather than being like what they intended it to be, which is like, we have lots of love to give. We think that relationships can exist in many forms. We want to be with more than one person. Whatever, all of those things that would all still be true, even if you were single, even if you were happy in a relationship. So if they only come up when you're unhappy, then maybe polyamory is not the answer for you.
Right. Also, another fact pattern I've seen a lot is that one person wants to open up the marriage because they feel like being with someone else. And then they turn around to get upset when the other person goes out there and has luck in their own outside the marriage dating life.
Yes.
Suddenly it's not okay anymore and everyone's jealous and upset. So letter writer, we totally agree with you that this is a disaster. We couldn't agree more.
Yes. But we mind your business.
Think you have to say a single word about it ever.
Yes. Like, go to the grave with this one.
Right. Well, you hear the phrase, we grew apart a lot when it comes to romantic relationships, but it can happen with friendships too. Yeah. And sitting here stressing out about how someone's making all the wrong choices and you need to change them is just one data point that you might be growing apart. Just think about it.
Put a note in their file.
Yeah, exactly. Those are all the questions we have for this week. It's been fun and hopefully helpful. Thank you so much, Ronald.
Thanks for having me. This has been great. I love giving advice to people, so thank you so much.
And you're very good at it. Listen to Ronald's podcast, Leaving the Theater and Wait for It, and follow him on Instagram and Twitter at _It'sBigRon. Do you need help getting along with partners, relatives, coworkers, and people in general? Write to me. Go to slate.com/Prudie. That's slate.com/PRUDIE. The Dear Prudence column publishes every Thursday.
If you'd like to hear your question answered on the podcast, we are looking for letter writers who would be comfortable recording their questions for the show. You can stay anonymous.
Dear Prudence is produced by Se'era Spragley Ricks and me, Jenée Desmond-Harris, with a special thanks to Maura, Currie, and Anuli, Ononye. Editorial help from Paola de Verona. Daisy Rosario is senior supervising producer, and Alicia Montgomery is Slate's VP of audio. And I'm your Dear Prudence, Jenée Desmond-Harris. That's all for this episode, but join us on today's episode of Prudie Plus, where we answered letters about how to make friends when your brother-in-law who doubles as your contractor has pissed off all your neighbors, and whether finding Tinder in your wife's download history is a divorceable offense. Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of our show page, or visit slate.com/Prudie Plus to get access wherever you listen. The episode is available for you to listen to right now. We'll see you there.